eventually I expect that the Iranians are more likely to give on the nuclear issue and on enrichment if they're able to maintain a privileged position on transit through the strait, because that will help provide them with money and with security. They get a level of deterrence if everybody knows these guys could shut down the strait in the future. That helps them. They never had nukes. They weren't going to get nukes. If they got nukes, they were going to get blown up. Like, everyone knew that. They were 2 weeks away if they had access to the material and they reprocessed it nuclear grade and they weren't stopped by the Americans or the Israelis. That's a lot of if-ands, right? So, but here, they've got influence over the strait. They have it. They've used it. They're using it. They're making money. Trump does not have a military plan to hit them back. So I think that is the most likely outcome. And if that is the case, then over time, the Iranians will cut more deals with more countries to get more oil out. And meanwhile, there will be, after the ceasefire is in place and strong, then the Europeans and other countries, the Indians, other countries will come in and they will start escorting ships to create a more secure environment in the strait itself. That is the good scenario, or it's the less bad scenario, because all of this should have been avoided.
I want to make sure I'm clear on this scenario. You're saying that they'll concede on the nuclear point, Iran, potentially?
At least somewhat. I think they will compromise on the nuclear point.
But in turn, they'll get more control over the strait?
Yes.
And what does that mean? That they'll be able to decide who goes through there? They'll get a toll charge. Oh, they'll be able to
charge. And by the way, you could define them charging the toll as part of the reconstruction money that they're going to need for the war that they just suffered.
Reparations.
I mean, they'll call it reparations. No one else will call it reparations, but that's fine. I think that is the good scenario. Again, the less bad scenario. And I would say it is more likely than not. There is another scenario, right? And the other scenario is that everything that Trump has been saying is because he doesn't yet have a military plan. Over the last days, with all this ceasefire, there's still this new aircraft strike group that is motoring its way over to the Gulf. You got thousands more American troops that are heading into position. Ground troops, right? They're going to have almost 15,000 total that will be deployed by Trump since this war started. They're going to be there in the next 2 weeks. Once Trump has them there, he can use them. And there are lots of things he might use them on. He keeps saying, I keep seeing him go back. Before I was talking about all the ways he was saying, we don't need to defend the strait. We don't need the nuclear, that we can hit them. But he also has been saying, we should take the oil. I've heard him say this on a number of occasions. I've also seen him say, if just the American people were a little more patient, we could take the oil. What does he mean by taking the oil? That's not a blockade. Blockade isn't taking the oil. Blockade is stopping the Iranians from getting the oil out. Take the oil is control the export facility on Karg Island, right? And
can you explain this for anyone that doesn't know what Karg Island is and the significance of it in the oil situation?
This is a comparatively small island. It's about half the size of Manhattan. It's not incredibly fortified or defended. And it's very close to the Iranian shore. And it is responsible for 90% of the export of Iranian oil. CENTCOM, the Central Command, say that you can take Karg Island with 12 to 15,000 men relatively comfortably.
So where is Karg Island on here?
Yeah, so Karg Island is right about here. It's not in the strait itself, but it's right off of the Iranian coast. And we're talking about 90% of Iranian oil export comes out through there. So if the Americans take it, obviously very easy for the Iranians to be engaged in strikes against them, but the Iranians will not be able to get any oil out. So suddenly the Americans have far more leverage over the Iranian economy, right? In a very direct way, in a very targeted way. And that is the way that you take the oil.
Could Trump actually take it out of this region somehow? Is there like another passage through that doesn't involve? Okay, so
no.
He could just stop the oil.
He could stop the oil.
Okay.
But again, if he has control of Karg, the oil coming out of Karg, if you want to bring it to market, the only ones that could do it would then be the Americans. Now, the Iranians at that point could still disrupt the strait. And there are other conversations, there are other military plans about how you might be able to take coastal regions, raids on the territory that would take out more ballistic missile sites, go after their drones. All of this takes more troops. all this takes more casualties, but would also give you more capacity to eventually enforce a navigable strait with escorts, which right now you can't do. Right now, the Iranians can prevent you from getting any ships out if they wish to. I think that the likelihood that Trump is ultimately going to make that order is well below 50%. I think that the worst scenario is not the more likely one because he understands how unpopular it will be. But it does mean that he's going to have to sell a pretty ugly pig with lipstick on it. Mm-hmm. It means that because this was the problem Trump has is he can't blame anyone else for this.
Yeah.
He's the decider. Like he did it. I mean, he's got his secretaries in cabinet that are all saying, well, the war, it's up to Trump. He's got the war goals. It'll be over when he says it is. It's all about Trump. He can blame NATO for not wanting to join him. They're joining him. It was his war of choice. And he's never been responsible directly for an economic downturn. I mean, the pandemic wasn't his fault, right? This is an economic downturn with oil prices shooting up. Gas is over $4 a gallon. Diesel's over $5. Inflation's ticking up. Food prices are going up. He's wildly underwater on affordability, and he is completely responsible for it. No one else is responsible.
And zooming out even further, when we think about this on a global scale, you've got Russia, who are at war with the Ukraine. That seems to have just completely vanished from the news cycle, by the way.
It has not in Europe, I promise you, but in the United States, they're talking a lot less about it. It's true. In Poland, this is a very big issue. In the Baltics, it is a very big issue.
And then you've got China, who must be laughing because it looks like the United States are just sort of self-harming themselves.
Yep.
And then you've got Europe, which is the last power, who seem to now just be sort of colluding with themselves and getting together and saying, listen, we're not going to help the US anymore. I mean, I grew up through all these little conflicts and wars, and the UK always seemed to come to the US's call. Yeah. And for the first time ever, I'm watching the UK go, actually, no, you do this one yourself.
Not doing this.
I'm going to meet with Macron in France, and we're going to huddle and go it alone. What is that big picture? And which part of that big picture is most pertinent to talk about?
Yeah, China's the most pertinent because it's the most powerful. Russia's the easiest to deal with, which is that for the Russians, they don't have much that they produce that's manufactured. They don't have very good technology, right? They're relying more on the Chinese.
They've got oil there, haven't they?
That they manufacture. They've got oil, they've got gas, they've got fertilizer, right? All the things with the prices have just spiked through the roof. That's what the Russians have. That's where their power is. And so they are making so much more money. Their economy was really getting squeezed with all the sanctions. Now they're getting so much more for everything that they actually sell. And the Americans have reduced sanctions like they did on Iran against Russia because Trump cares about the markets, as you say. So Russia's in a better position for that reason. And they're in a better position because all the weapons the Americans have been selling to the Europeans to get to Ukraine, America now needs to get to the Middle East. So the Ukrainians are going to have a harder time defending their cities against Russian ballistic missiles, against Russian drones. So this clearly means that Putin will be much, much less interested in a ceasefire, which, let's face it, he wasn't really very interested in to begin with. Trump, at the beginning of this term, promised he would end this war. He was hugely frustrated. He goes to Israel to announce the Gaza ceasefire. It's a big win. The Knesset, the Israeli parliament, they're standing ovation. And it's like, I thought I was going to get the Russia war done, and I failed it. I haven't been able to do that. I got this one instead. Like, Trump never brings up his own failures, but this really bothers him. So here you've got yet more ability for the Russians to say, we're going to persist. And it makes it more likely that Trump will eventually do a deal with the Russians over the heads of the Europeans. So that's the Russia issue kind of in a little box. Now, Europe, we already talked about how Europe is having its problems economically. It doesn't have the productivity, it doesn't have the growth.